So since Sunday, we had some internet issues at the church. We were unable to broadcast the worship service like we normally do. So I thought I would take a moment today here in the office and just record the message part, the teaching part, because I had some people say that it would be good for this to be able to get out there for people to see as well. So we're in our Horrible Bosses series that we've been in for the last few weeks. And we've been talking about these emotions that control us and how we can say that, no, you're not the boss of us. And so today, I want to cover the topic of anger. But before I get into it, let me just share with you, one of my shining moments in life. When my children were little, while I was still in my undergraduate work, I scheduled my school and my working around their schedules, which meant whenever they were in class during the daytime was when I took classes. But what that also meant is every morning was a little bit busy for me getting ready to be able to go to school, to get them ready to go to school, to have breakfast, all of those sorts of things. And on one particular day, the son wasn't really wanting to go to school and was dragging his feet and going as slow as he can whenever he was eating and watching some cartoons, and inevitably was like, I don't want to go. And so finally I get him outside, I get him to the car, and at this time I am driving this 1980 Pontiac Catalina. I mean, this was a boat of a car, the type with big bench seats in the front and the back. You can fit like four full size grown adults in each bench seat. And so I get him in to his place, open up the door. He starts to get in. I go around to get into my side. And once I get in the car, I look over and his door is open. And he's sitting there saying, I can't reach it. I can't open it. Again, he's dragging his feet, and by this time, I'm mad. And so I do the only thing I could think of in the moment, and I reach across, and I grab the door frame of the car, and I pull myself out and grab the whole door, and I pull it shut, and I slam it, not realizing that my fingers were still in the door. Not so much so that I actually had to open the door back up to retrieve my fingers. Needless to say, he won. And that was the day I won Greatest Father of the Year. No. What happened is I actually broke the tips of my fingers, and my day at school was canceled that day because I had to go get this checked out, only to find out that when you break the tips of your fingers, doctors will say there's nothing they can do for it. Just don't do it again. Now, listen, that's just a stupid example of what can happen when we get angry. But if anger takes over our lives, we can go from slamming doors on our fingers to crashing cars, to destroying homes, inevitably, possibly even assaulting somebody or rioting or looting. You see, when anger becomes the boss of us, we can very quickly end up destroying something or someone that we love, or destroying something that we hate and paying the price for it afterwards. And it seems like each week there is a public story of someone who has combined their unchecked anger with an agenda, leading to yet another shooting. Yes, anger can be deadly. So we're in episode 3 of this series, this You're Not the Boss of Me. And we had a subtitle on it that was Firing the Emotions That Control Us. Because that's what we're learning to do, to be able to say guilt or shame or envy or fear, you are not the boss of me. And today is all about anger. Being able to say anger, you are not the boss of me. And according to the Bible, there are different ways to express our anger constructively, but it's not easy. See, the writer of Proverbs writes it this way. He says, the one who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and the one whose temper is controlled is better than the one who captures a city. See, the writer is implying that sometimes it takes more strength and more courage and control of your emotions to actually control your emotions, especially anger, than it does to actually capture a fortified city. So you know what the question is. The next question is, so when have you lost your temper lately? When have you maybe screamed irrationally at your kids, or maybe hit them? Maybe you've left your spouse, your husband, your wife, shaking from your words, or maybe it's the kind of person you're the kind of person that unleashes on the server at the restaurant because they made a mistake. Do you find yourself honking your horn and giving the one-fingered salute to the person who's cut you off in traffic? Listen, have family celebrations or holidays been ruined because you've lost your temper? Do you find yourself enraged by politics, the things of our time, saying things or posting things out there because you are enraged? But what's Proverbs is telling us is that being able to control our anger is better than being a mighty warrior, war hero, a hero that can capture a city. You see, when we control our anger, good things can happen. And when we let the anger be the boss of us, it will run and it will ruin our lives and it will ruin our community and it will ruin our cities and our souls. Now, here's the thing is we don't know why for sure that some of us have shorter anger fuses than others. We don't know why. Some people get violent when they get angry, and others they stuff it down. But one thing we know for sure is that God created us with this capacity for the emotion of anger. In fact, the scripture tells us that God gets angry and that God gets angry because God cares. And when God gets angry, it's always because sin and injustice. Like in Psalm 30, it says that God's anger lasts only a moment, but God's favor lasts a lifetime. Over and over, the Bible repeats this to us, like Psalm 145, that the Lord is gracious and compassionate, that God is slow to anger and rich in love. So yes, God gets angry and God cares, but God's anger is never the end of the story, and it only lasts for a while God's love continues further than any anger can. And since we are made in the image of God, we have the same built-in capacity to experience anger, especially when we know that something just isn't right, when there's something we should be angry about. And our anger, when we channel it in the right ways, it actually can energize us to take action, to make things good and to make things right. In fact, some of the best things that Christians have ever done were prompted by anger. These are the times that we get so angry about something that is unjust and right that we make action. We do it in our own lives as well. There have been so times I've been so angry at myself because I've repeated a mistake, or there's a failure or a sin in my life that I get so angry that it actually compels me to actually make changes in life. And a lot of the things that Christians have gotten angry about in the past have led to incredible changes in our society. Civil rights is one of those. It all started out of a righteous anger, workers' rights and women's rights. And listen, Christians got angry and things changed. And today, it is right for us to be angry once again. You see, the last few weeks, we have witnessed hell on earth here in America again and again. On Saturday, May 14th, a young man entered a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, with the agenda of killing as many African American people as possible. His motives were racially driven. The very next day, a 68-year-old man entered a Taiwanese church with the goal of killing as many people there as possible. He killed one and injured five. The young man the day before killed 10. You see, it appears that this person at this church, his target was intentionally based on people's nationality. On Wednesday, a couple days later, Reverend Marita Harrell was stabbed to death by somebody that she was ministering to. Her body was then placed in a van and set on fire. And then, last Tuesday, a week ago, today actually, we once again saw our social media news feeds blow up with the horrific news of a young man entering an elementary school, killing 19 children and 2 adults. And it is right that we are angry. You see, humanity is angry, regardless of our religious preferences. And we all know that this should not be. And when there are changes to come, I know that it's the people of faith who will be at the forefront of those changes. It's in our nature. It's in our calling as lovers of Jesus. Remember, Jesus tells us that we are to love others as I have loved you. the way that Jesus has loved us. And it's that love that is going to show the world that we actually follow Jesus. It's that love that is a mandate for us to not just sit silently by and let our prayers and let our thoughts actually bathe the status quo. It's a mandate for us to not just sit by while hell on earth unfolds in schools and in grocery stores and houses of worship and on our city streets. That love should compel us to care more for the life of others than our own individual rights and liberties, or at least it should. And I believe that our collective anger, justified, righteous anger, is the very thing that can lead to change. And by the way, I want you to know this kind of anger is not the problem that I'm talking about today. The problem is that often when we have this sort of anger, we don't know how to channel it productively. And instead, it turns into aggression and it turns into violence. And Jesus, he took a hard line, a strong stand against violence. You see, if somebody strikes you on the cheek, he tells them to turn the other cheek. He tells you that if somebody forgives you, then or does something wrong against you, that you are to forgive them, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. Essentially, so many times that you might forget to count. Jesus, he went to the cross humbly, and he showed us a way of nonviolence. You see, we see Jesus get angry, and yes, he got physical once in the scriptures when he drove the money changers out of the temple because they were taking advantage of the poor religious pilgrims. Yeah, see, Jesus' righteous anger and action was directed against the religious and political leaders creating a system that took advantage of the poor. It was an issue of justice. It was always an issue. And it was an issue for them as well because these money changers not only were doing horrible things to the poor, but they were also disgracing a place that to Jesus and all the Jewish people revered as holy, a place where God was at himself. It was not an out of control rage. You see, the problem though is that very few of us have ever really been taught how to manage our feelings of anger. And since we haven't been taught, we don't teach other people and we don't teach the next generation. And so typically when it comes to anger, most of us react in one of 2 ways. We're either bottlers or we're spewers. And this last week, you've probably seen both sides of this. You see, bottlers, they tend to say that they don't get upset with things that anger them. They're just disappointed or they're just frustrated. And I understand this because I'll confess I'm a bottler. I'll often say, I'm not angry. I'm just frustrated. I'm frustrated. In fact, I had a counselor once tell me, "What do you mean you're frustrated?" And I just told him, I said, whatever happened doesn't make me angry. It just frustrates me. And he called me on it. Said, "No, Ben, you are angry and it is okay to be angry." You see, but no, as bottlers, what we do is we take this anger and we think that it's a bad thing, that it needs to be shoved down, it needs to be bottled, it needs to be buried. And bottlers often think that it's a God honoring thing to do, that we're convinced that somehow if we just bottle all this down, that somehow, sometime later on, it will resolve itself. But the problem is, anger bottled doesn't work that way. You see, bottling your anger, it's a lot like burying it. In fact, it's like burying toxic waste. And you put these toxic poisons in the canisters and you bury it underground, maybe outside the city limits, and everybody thinks the problem is gone. But later, people in the city, they start to get sick and they start growing tails and extra eyes. And eventually they can trace it back to these buried canisters of poison. Listen, bottled up anger, it always leaks. And when it does, it poisons our bodies. I mean, it physically manifests in us with headaches and stomach problems and sleep disorders. It poisons our minds in the form of distorted thinking, or it makes us irrational or cynical or hopeless or depressed. And all of these internal physical and mental symptoms, they don't stay inside very long. They start to show on the outside. They start to leak. And we see that because all of a sudden we've got short tempers and we've got bad moods. And we end up hurting the relationships with everybody we come into contact with, our coworkers and our friends and our neighbors, but especially the ones that we are in the contact with the most, our family. And if we bottle up our anger and we bury it, it always always leaks and somebody is going to suffer. So bottling up is letting anger still be the boss of you. The opposite is spewing it. And spewers, listen, they don't have any problem at all showing their anger. They just let it fly. In fact, they may justify it, just say, you know what, that's just how I'm wired. If they have to slam the door to get their point across, they slam the door, they kick the dog, or they roast somebody online from the safety of their keyboards. They curse their spouse or maybe even curse God. It's all an attempt to let off steam. And it doesn't matter if they leave a trail of bruised, broken, or dead people in their wake. The writer of Proverbs knew how much damage a spewer could have, which is why they wrote this. They said, listen, make no friends with those given to anger, and do not associate with hotheads, or you may learn their ways and entangle yourself in their trap. This spewer, what he's saying is, can rub off on you. It can start a chain reaction of violence. That's why Proverbs tells us also that a fool is the one who gives full vent to his anger, but the wise one quietly mulls it over. Listen, spewing and bottling, they're dangerous business, but there is another way. And that's what we're going to talk about, is God's way to manage our anger so that it does not become the boss of us. Now, first, we need to acknowledge something when we're angry. To manage it God's way, we just have to say it. We have to acknowledge our anger. Remember, anger in itself isn't good or bad. It's simply an indicator that something isn't right, something that you care about. And anger is like the warning lights on the dashboard of your car. And it's telling you that there's something that needs to be addressed. And if you don't pay attention to the warning lights, then something really bad could happen. Now, listen, for some of us, we need professional counselors to work out our issues of anger. Others, we need to become better readers of the warning lights in our minds and in our bodies. Warning lights like our clenched jaws, or our increased heart rate, or our racing thoughts, or just feeling this heat under the collar, or this fixation that you just can't let something go. You see, anger experts say that you need to keep your anger in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, right up here in the front, because that's the area in our brain where we think and we process and we use logic to figure things out. That if you allow anger to actually get to the limbic part of your brain, that's where we start to get aggressive, whether it's verbally aggressive or physically aggressive. In fact, that's where our ancient fight or flight part of our brain is, which was good because early on in life, we needed something in our brains to tell us that whenever we see a lion, we don't say, "Here, kitty, kitty," but we run. Now, some people call this part of our brain the lizard part or the reptile part of our brain because it is reactionary rather than reasonable. You see, being able to recognize anger and keeping it centered where it needs to be creates a space where we can actually work through it, which helps us to do the very next step, which is to figure out why. Ask why questions. Figure out why you're angry. And most likely it's because three major reasons or domains that causes us anger. I was doing some reading this last week and came across this idea that for the most part, we get angry around threats to or people attacking our resources, like our food or our money, or our residences, which isn't just our house, but also our communities, our work, our school, our churches, or our relationships. When there's a threat against our relationships, which includes our family, but of course our coworkers, the people that we're close to, maybe in civic groups or political groups or religious groups. But when we feel like one of those domains of life, resources or residences or relationships, we feel like one of those has been threatened or taken away from us, it activates our anger. And in so many ways, this is what we see happening in our own culture, in our own country. It seems like month after month, these are the sorts of things that create the violence around racism. This was precisely why there was violence at the Capitol last year. This is seen so crystal clear in the events 2 weeks ago with the shooting in Buffalo. You see, one of the stated reasons that the young man gave for his actions were based on what's called the replacement theory. And at its root, the replacement theory is based on a fear that the white skinned majority and culture in America is being replaced by other races. And listen, yes, America has become more diverse in our lifetimes, and it will be continued to be more diverse. It is cultural evolution, it's not an agenda created to eliminate a previous white centric culture. But listen, when we mix that fear with misinformation, then that feeling of anger, if it goes unchecked because someone somewhere sees a threat to our resources or their residences or their relationships, when that goes unchecked, then taken to its logical extreme conclusion, you see what happened in Buffalo. On a larger scale, a global scale, it's the same reason that nations often go to war. See, in our own recent history in America, the war on terror, which first started as, we'll just say, bringing to justice those who sinned against us, it then morphed into a war on a threat that could come against our resources or our residents or our relationships. And by God, just the threat of that, or just the possibility that might happen, actually made people angry enough to vote to eliminate that threat before it could ever manifest. But listen, for followers of Jesus, this way of dealing with anger and fear, it is not an option. As followers of Jesus, violence is not the answer. We're called to be people of faith, to remember our guidance from Scripture. It tells us this, to not let sin, it says, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down on you while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. You see, the devil gets a foothold when we leave the reasoning part of our brains behind and we turn everything over to the fear-based part of our brains. And there's a lot of there's a lot of expert fear mongers feeding us highly concentrated, fear-based information day after day. Never has there been so much fear peddling to us 24/7 and right in the palm of our hands and our smartphones, all designed to fuel our anger. So listen, continually ask yourself, continually be in conversations with people who can push back some on you. What domain of your life feels threatened? And identify that, but then don't live in fear of it. And we talked about fear last week, but those who control your fear around your residences and your resources and your relationships, the ones that control that fear, they control you. So do what you can to keep it in this prefrontal cortex of your brain and not your limbic system. Stay in the reasoning part of your brain, not the reactionary part. Don't let sin get to you. Don't by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down on you while you're still hungry. Don't let the devil get a foothold. Now listen, when we are angry and we acknowledge it, not bottle it, not spew it, we start to ask the why questions. Why are we angry? But then we have another step, which is then to look at options. Because we need to find out not just why, but then what do we do with it? How do we channel it? And here are a few possibilities. Once you recognize the presence of your anger, it's vital to figure out where to put that energy. Anger doesn't have to be destructive. It can be constructive. Now experts advise against punching things when we get angry, because what they say is taking a baseball bat or your fist and punching a pillow, it doesn't take long before that pillow can then become something else and possibly a face. So instead, diffuse that energy of anger in different ways. Go for a run. Maybe a do-it-yourself project that you've been putting off. Maybe it's break something that needs to be broken, by the way. For instance, I have a couple of old computers that I've just not gotten rid of, and they are worthless, and you can't even turn them on. But one of these days, one of those dudes is going off the roof, waiting for the right time. Maybe it's artwork. You know, some of the most amazing accomplishments in music and in poetry and in painting and sculpture have been created because somebody channeled their anger in the right way. Listen, if you're a follower of Jesus, draw from the scriptures, these passages in the Bible about our anger. Bring them into your spiritual toolbox to help them guide you, and pray and ask God to give you assistance whenever a crisis is at hand. See, prayer and meditation, they're great ways to stay in or get back into the reasoning part of your minds. Bring the mind of a mature Christian, somebody else that models healthy anger management, and help them imagine ways that you can better handle a situation. Listen, look at the options. Pick one or two or three of them, but put those into play when you're angry. But here's the other question is what do you do and how do you deal when somebody else is angry? We've probably been there. What do you When you're dealing with somebody else's anger, experts tell us first, don't meet anger with anger. In fact, experts tell us the best way to de-escalate somebody in the face of anger is through calm. And in my own experience, I've seen that humbly getting to know somebody helps de-escalate their anger. You see, at one point in my ministry, I worked primarily with the homeless and the recovery community in Joplin, Missouri. And while, listen, not everybody in those communities deal with anger issues, many of them do. And many times, countless times, I spent periods of time, long times, hours sometimes, just listening to somebody and actually listening, not listening to just correct them in their way of thinking. No, not to tell them also that their anger isn't justified, but just to listen. And every time I did, they changed. Their anger was able to be transferred back into the frontal cortexes of their brain where they could process it. And listen, being able to process that anger often eliminates the consequences of acting on it in violent ways. De escalating can help people move out of aggression to connection, and connection is the point. But listen, if you've not dealt with your own anger, then you are less likely to be able to help others deal with theirs. But showing up and with empathy shows that you care, and it builds connections which lowers the temperature of people's anger. Listen, anger does not have to be the boss. So we recognize it. We ask why we're angry, and then we react the Jesus way. Listen, as your pastor, I implore you, do not let anger be the boss of your life, even when your resources or your residences or your relationships are threatened or taken from you. You can take the path of a peacemaker. I know you can if you choose to. And should you choose, listen, your life will change, and your relationships will change, and your church will change, and your community will change. And maybe, just maybe, that change will bleed over into the larger culture that we are living in today. Believe in you. So, one last reminder from the Apostle Paul. Remember, he said this: don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. Anger, in the name and the power of Jesus, I will not let you run my life and ruin my life, or ruin my city, or ruin my church or my country. Anger, I will not allow you to give Satan a foothold. Anger, you are not the boss of me. You are not the boss of me. So, may we be able to not be ruled by the emotion of anger. May we be able to resolve our emotions and use the correct, righteous angers to change our communities. And when we do, may we be a shining example to a watching world, a world that regularly sees hell on earth. May we be those people in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.